Humanity, distinct and accomplished, nowhere more than in our ability to communicate, resulting in language, literature, music, art, and technology. Communication tools that span cultural and geographic boundaries. Communication, the human imperative. Photography has been around for a little over 150 years. These engaging images on paper quickly established a central role in everyday life. Above all, they recorded faces, from presidents to paupers. For the first time, common citizens could have a permanent record of friends, family, and events, as well as the world around them. Not a day passes when we are not affected by the pervasive nature of photography in advertisements, newspapers, and magazines, the snapshots we take on vacation. We can't drive a car without carrying a laminated photo. And can there be a family that doesn't have a photo album? Using the collections of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. as our focal point, we will explore the uses of photography. We'll see what enables photographs to speak to us from the past, illuminate the present, and in the process, discover new ways of seeing our world and our lives. We will examine photography and its unique abilities as a communications tool, the ability to freeze time.
Knowledge TV Retro, brought to you by Jones International University, the first fully online accredited university. Change your life for the better on your schedule. 8-week classes begin next month. Visit jiu.edu to find out more.
A photograph can make a viewer laugh or cry. It can instill fear and evoke anger. Photographers were quick to realize the impact an image could have on society. Before the end of the 19th century, Jacob Riis was documenting the squalid life of the underprivileged, particularly child laborers. In 1904, an organization was created with the aim of putting an end to abusive child labor practices.
The National Child Labor Committee was just beginning, and they were beginning to understand the power of photography as a tool to convey a message to people and to convince them about something. And they hired Louis Hine initially as a freelance photographer in 1906.
Hine was charged with documenting the plight of these young laborers and soon went to work for the committee full-time. The indignities suffered by these children, some as young as 3 years old, inflamed Hine's passions, for he himself had been a child laborer.
Hine was certainly among the first photographers who learned how to see with a certain kind of formal clarity and directness social information, social scenes.
His simple and direct images forced people to confront the immorality of children at work, being denied an education, and their own childhoods.
I think Hine wanted the viewer to feel something about these children, and he focused on the children in the situations and thereby drew in his viewer to the child.
Hine understood the power of documentary photographs, how the emotions they raised could bring about social change, even if that change was slow. He used the camera as a weapon in the fight against injustice. The eloquent plea for social change captured in the child labor photos echoes in the photos of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Those photographs certainly led to the media coming into the Deep South with their cameras.
As the NAACP fought to establish the civil rights movement in the South, they found it virtually impossible to get news to the rest of the country from behind the cotton curtain. The NAACP understood the power of photographs and used them to expose the brutality of the struggle for racial equality. Activist Medgar Evers suffered the most extreme form of brutality. Looking at these photographs, his wife Merle recalls the times.
He was the sole spokesperson for his people in the state of Mississippi. Therefore, he became the target. And they thought, if we silence him, we will silence the movement.
Photographs that changed social attitudes are strong reminders of their time and place. But the impact of such images can change with the passage of time. By examining old photographs and finding new ways to look at them, it may be possible to look into the eyes of the people pictured and discover an inner truth that speaks from their time to ours.
Good history doesn't attempt to judge the past from the present. It seeks to make that past moment come alive. And there's no better way to do that than through the window that a still photograph offers.
Photographs take us on a journey through the Civil War, the first period in American history that we are able to see almost as if we were there ourselves. Matthew Brady, already well known for his portraits of famous personalities, sent a team of photographers into the field to create a visual record of the Civil War.
You can stare through these old photographs into the faces of men who gave up their lives and who risked their lives for causes which they believed passionately.
Even with an army of photographers, it was impossible to capture all aspects of war.
Of the 1 million or so photographs that it's estimated were taken, there is not one single photograph taken actually, literally, in battle. Because of the long exposure times, because of the huge and cumbersome equipment, because of the obvious danger to the photographers.
Although you don't see images of actual battle in course, in some ways more effective may be the aftermath of battle, the broken bodies, the corpses on battlefields.
Many of the images were seen in newspapers, giving the American public its first glimpse of the horrors of war in their own homes.
The country was stunned. Nothing like this had ever been seen in the history of humankind. The New York Times said, "If he has not laid the bodies at our doorsteps, I do not know what he has done." There was a sense that for the first time human beings were faced with the palpable cost of war.
From that time on, photography would transform the world for us all. But what were the origins of this powerful medium of communication? This is reputed to be the first photograph, taken in 1827 by a French inventor who stumbled on a compound that was sensitive to light. The blurred view from a window at his house needed an exposure time of 8 hours. Clearly, some refinement in the process was needed. The daguerreotype captured its image in a matter of minutes. Although for portraits, the sitter was braced rigidly into place to prevent the photograph from blurring. The oddity of the new process made some people fearful.
There are some specific people who put on record their, let's say, uncertainty, if not outright anxiety and fear of the daguerreotype. After all, it was a very complicated process that involved some smelly chemicals. It also involved the appearance and then the disappearance of the photographer as he went into the darkroom. Photography looked something like an updated version of alchemy. And there are still some, deep-seated superstitions, you might say folk beliefs, which photography trampled upon.
The daguerreotype had one major limitation. Each exposure produced a single image that couldn't be copied easily. But English inventor William Henry Fox Talbot solved the problem by fixing images on light-sensitive paper. Copies could then be made by exposing the paper again, much like today's process of negatives and prints. Before the end of the 19th century, George Eastman's development of the roll of film put cameras in the hands of the masses. With the memorable slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." Photography was now out of the hands of the alchemists and within reach of ordinary people. Each image creating an instant in history that gives us a more complete relationship to our past. Photographs can document a moment, transporting us to other times and places. But can the images tell us more than what is already obvious?
There's literally hundreds of ways to look at a still photograph. Even the simplest of ones betrays many, many secrets. But I find that as you extend to the photograph the respect that it's due, it begins to yield up secrets, new stories. For example, if I zoom in, I may find a new tension, a new dimension to what I'm interested in.
Photographs introduce us to cultures from the past. They let us celebrate inventive perseverance and get to know the face of scientific success. They invite us to experience the emotions of new immigrants arriving in the land of opportunity. Many of those immigrants would be caught up in the Great Depression of the 1930s. It's a period that comes alive to us as a result of a huge photographic archive created by U.S. government agencies in support of President Roosevelt's New Deal. They are now housed at the Library of Congress.
It is the largest pictorial collection about United States history that has been compiled to date, and probably the largest that will ever be compiled.
It is a visual encyclopedia, and it's a visual encyclopedia that's very extensive. There are at least 80,000 prints in the file and nearly 200,000 negatives.
The most prolific agency was the Farm Security Administration. Led by Roy Stryker, the photographer's task was to document the everyday lives of ordinary Americans. And publicize the plight of those hardest hit by the Depression. Stryker recruited photographers who shared his philosophy that every person was important and should be treated with dignity. Once in the field, the photographers were left to their own resources. When people were reluctant, the photographers would try to put them at ease. Once the ice was broken, the personality of the subjects often broke through their naturally careworn faces.
They posed very stiffly, and I tried to think of what I could do to make them relax a little bit. So I said to Mr. Lyman, "Mr. Lyman, I think your pants are falling down." And they broke up, which is just what I wanted.
The photographers knew it was impossible to just document American life. They knew that their very presence altered the scene in front of the lens, sometimes in unexpected ways.
If you don't know what's behind those pictures, you might think that they're dancing because they're so glad to be in jail or they're so happy, but it's not so. It's because the sheriff told them, ordered them to dance for the photographer.
Perhaps the most familiar of the FSA photographs is Migrant Mother, taken by Dorothea Lange in 1936. The 32-year-old mother of 7, caught poignantly in Lang's lens, was camped at the side of a road in California. She was unable to find work because of a crop failure and unable to move on, having sold the tires of her car to buy food. Lang took 6 pictures of the family, but this one image became a symbol of the plight of migrant workers. What is it about her face, her worry, that has drawn a nation to her for generations? Lang's sympathy for people, expressed through her lens, is also present in the writings of another FSA photographer.
Some were poor, so poor they had traveled by foot, pushing their young and newborn in buggies and carts. The makeshift shanties dotting the desolate landscapes were built of scrap wood, and the walls were covered with newspapers. I had known poverty firsthand, but there I learned how to fight its evil, along with the evil of racism, with a camera.
Like Lewis Hine before him, Gordon Parks used his camera as a weapon to combat social ills in society. He was angered by the racism he encountered, and this anger led to his first and best-known FSA photograph.
I saw a charwoman. Her name was Ella Watson, and she was mopping the floor. She had her brooms on the side. I asked her suddenly, "Would you pose for me? Would you for a photograph?" I asked her to take a broom, one hand and a mop in the other, and the American flag was hanging down from the ceiling. And I posed her in front of it. And from that moment on, I thought of it as American Gothic. And I showed it to Roy 2 days later. And he said, "Well, you're getting the right idea, but you're going to get us all fired." I was just expressing my anger the best way I could through my camera. I realize now, years and years later, that the honesty of the picture, the simplicity of it, if you might call it that, has made it one of my strongest pictures.
During World War II, Stryker, Parks, and the remaining FSA photographers were shifted to the Office of War Information. Their task remained much the same, but Congress began to question whether public money should be spent on something as frivolous as a National Photographic Archive.
In the 1940s, Congress was quite upset that federal funds had been squandered taking pictures of things that were this ordinary, this routine. But now, in the 1990s, very few homes look like this. Very few kitchens look like this. And we, as a people, can come back and look at these and say, this is what it was like at that time. This is the way biscuits were made. You don't get them in the freezer section of the grocery in a little tin.
Each of the 80,000 photographs in the FSA OWI collection represents an individual story that resonates of a time, a place, and its people. This historical record has proved so valuable that the Library of Congress continues the tradition today, documenting cultural expression in grassroots America.
All aspects of culture, everything from music to dance to verbal traditions, material culture, things that are visually created, cultural landscape, foodways, the whole range of cultural traditions.
The American Folklife Center was created by an act of Congress to preserve and present the way of life of communities across America. It has expanded on the concepts of the FSA by collecting sound recordings as well as images.
In the dead hours of night, she rose from her blanket, a battle to fight.
what I want these photos to bring home is that it's all here, alive, and now. It's not just past. Even when we see photos from the past now, we can see connections to the present, you know. And so I think it brings culture alive in our imaginations.
The center's work allows a permanent glimpse into the heart and vitality of a community. Like the photographs of Brady, Hine, the FSA, and others, by looking past the focal point, you first begin to learn the underlying complexities and start to really see. Looking below the surface of photographs reveals the details of past lives and elements of human experience unavailable elsewhere, a visual archaeology. I hope you will endeavor to learn more about the interpretation of photographs. To explore historic photographs further, the online services of the Library of Congress offer an excellent starting point. Their website address follows, along with some recommended reading. I'm Michael Dorn. Thanks for watching.
Knowledge TV Retro, brought to you by Jones International University, the first fully online accredited university. Change your life for the better on your schedule. 8-week classes begin next month. Visit jiu.edu to find out more.